Okay, well, we can get started. Welcome everyone to our Smart VR industry talk on VR and pediatrics. We appreciate you coming today. This webinar is hosted by the USC SMART-VR Center, which is funded by the USC Office of Research. To learn more about our center and events, see our website at smartvr.usc.edu, or you can follow us on Twitter at USC_SmartVR. We have with us today as our featured guest, the creator of ReadyTeddy, Max Orozco, CEO and founder of Cognitive Leap, Chen, and Smart VR co-director and director of research at Cognitive Leap, Dr. Skip Rizzo, as our co-host. We will be having a Q&A session following presentations, so jot down any questions or comments you have to share with them in the meantime. And with that, we can begin with Max Orozco on his project ReadyTeddy.
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Let me share my screen. And can you see the screen okay? Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for having me and everyone taking time aside on this beautiful holiday to join us. But yeah, I want to thank you very much. And the goals of this talk are to go over just some of our design considerations when developing ReadyTeddy, but also development tips and creating VR applications in healthcare, particularly aimed at pediatrics. So as we see more institutions actually adopting ReadyTeddy, our product, I wanted to discuss some of our learnings on how technology fits into these clinical settings and how as a community we have to acknowledge some of the constraints of those that we serve. So along those lines, we see more and more applications being created and immersive technologies finding more use cases. But I want to quickly acknowledge just the business of pediatric device development and how we as academics, business people, and activists just need to acknowledge that these technologies should be deployed as a tool for all people and patients. So ReadyTeddy is particularly a good use case that I know quite well about. Anyway, a bit of my context of myself. I spent my career in academic neuroscience using MRI techniques to map human brain development. And if you've ever had an MRI, or if you've ever worked with kids in an MRI setting, you know that MRIs are intimidating and scary. So apart from the fear of this large machine and the sounds that it makes, an MRI requires a patient to remain perfectly still. So at CHLA, we use this tool called a physical mock MRI, which I'll go into in a little bit, but is very helpful in habituating and preparing kids for their eventual real scan. After leaving CHLA, I joined a new institution and they just didn't have the space to house this large device. And so we were left to our own devices to prepare kids, and our data and even the kids' ability to go into the scanner suffered as a result. So to solve my own problem, I started looking around at other applications that were being used to address fear, phobias, exposure therapies, and utilization of systematic desensitization of this controllable virtual environments. And so I was like, why can't we build this for an MRI? So as I began to iterate and solve my problem in research, it became clear that there's a much larger problem in clinical settings, where 49% of all pediatric MRIs are sedated. And these rates are even higher for low-income children and children with English as a second language. And much of this is due to the incentive structure of those individual hospitals, but it's also the decision-making process. So the way that clinicians kind of decide who gets to be sedated is based on almost 3 different questions. What is the age of the child? What is the length of the scan? And then they'll ask parents, can your kid sit still for 45 minutes to an hour and a half? And if they hesitate or say no, then that kid is almost blanketly sedated. So the scale of this problem is pretty substantial. There are 2 million pediatric sedations a year, and research shows that with adequate preparation, the frequency of sedation can be reduced by 40%. The bottom line is that sedation is being overprescribed, particularly with very few data points for the decision-making protocol. So although sedation is safe, I can speak for almost everyone here that it's not preferred. And so apart from this patient experience, it's also having a huge impact on hospitals themselves. These sedations are huge bottlenecks for radiology suites. A sedated scan takes 3 times longer to acquire. And if you look at the number of clinical touch points, there's huge inefficiencies in time and staffing. There's no shortage of the need for MRIs. Based on some interviews that we've had, the wait list for MRIs span from 3 weeks to 3 months, with one institution having a 9-month wait list period for their MRI. So the tactics used to address these issues differ greatly across the country. And so let's take a look at these real life examples of 2 different institutions. The one on the top is in an urban environment. Their primary patient population is government-based insured patients, and kind of the nature of the reimbursement rates between commercially insured individuals and people on Medicaid or government insurance is that the reimbursement rates is dramatically lower for government insured patients. So essentially, these commercial insured individuals are subsidizing the care for government insurance. So this urban hospital, throughput is a huge priority. The more people that they can get into their hospital means they get more funding. And as a result, their sedation rate is 65%. And it's not that the MRI experience in and of itself is any different at another institution, but this wealthy hospital that has much more commercially insured patients, that serves a much more wealthy neighborhood, that serves much more homogenous patient population, they just reimburse better, which means their staff has more time for personalized care, more attention, and that as a result, their sedation rate is 18%, huge. So acknowledging the constraints and incentives of each of these hospitals, we're really hoping that ReadyTeddy can bridge that gap and that disparity. And it's not unique to the MRI suite. For fee-for-service systems, commercially insured patients are 1/3 of the volume, but 2/3 of the revenue, and oftentimes 300 to 500% of the profit. So as a result, we see a lot of new companies competing for this for the same market share of these commercially insured and highly desired patient population. And so they're trying to drive these patients into profitable hospital sectors, cancer, pharmacy, orthopedics. I'm thinking particularly one company, if you know of One Medical, is really focused on improving this patient experience for primary care as a means to kind of control the funnel of referrals for that patient along their healthcare timeline. However, for pediatrics, we see 50% of children being on these Medicaid enrollment programs. And that's why we see a lot of hospitals being nonprofit as a nonprofit status. Because if they're not getting reimbursed at the same result, then they can essentially write off the care and provide that as a community value. So despite most new med tech companies, again, fighting for that profitable patient population, we see government insurance growing at a faster rate. A lot of this is driven for Medicare by our aging population, but we still see those patients covered by Medicaid, these low-income children, growing at a faster rate than private insurance. So there's a huge call to action for those interested in pediatrics to think about bridging these gaps in the equity of care and the disparity between patients based on their insurance demographics. So where I think technology, specifically in virtual reality and these new immersive technologies, is to find these opportunities to either make labor more productive or cut labor costs, particularly in this growing government-based insurance. So along those lines, COVID in the last year has been a really interesting moment for digital therapeutics and digital interventions. I'm sure we're all aware of Akili Interactive and EndeavorX, which was the first ever video game to be FDA approved to treat ADHD. Similarly, we see Applied VR and their FDA approval for palliative care and pain management. So kind of piggybacking on the waves of these trends, we built ReadyTeddy which is a VR simulation of an MRI procedure. ReadyTeddy is kind of meant to be administered prior to an MRI or even when the MRI is ordered. And our child-friendly content exposes kids to the sights and sounds of an MRI and then gives a report to a clinician on the patient's ability to stay still or in their head motion. It can then also be administered immediately prior to the scan to reinforce that preparation. But we built it on three main principles, being A, to reduce fear for the patient, two, for ease of use for clinicians, particularly in time-strapped clinical teams in these government-based institutions or government-serving institutions, but also providing a scalable tool that can be deployed without the need for translational service, so it can meet the needs of the patient population around the world. So diving a little bit deeper into our value proposition, we focused on three main elements, and I'll go into them each individually. But one is usability. Again, so these time-strapped teams that are serving, that are more incentivized for throughput, have the same access to tools as other patient populations. Design, so that the content itself connects with kids. And then lastly, this motion training. So eventually we can add a new data point for clinicians that can catch kids that are falling through the cracks of their current sedation protocol and unfortunately are being unnecessarily sedated. So let me jump into usability. And this was the physical mock scanner. This is kind of our competition, actually. And this was the tool that I was using at CHLA. It's a fiberglass replica of an MRI, and it's used for play therapy. And really, literature supports how effective it is in reducing sedation rates, reducing motion in an MRI, and even reducing cortisol levels in saliva in kids that use this before their scan. However, we see huge barriers to adoption. You know, this fiberglass replica takes a whole room to administer and take a dramatic amount of time from staff. So for those reasons, the healthcare economics just don't work out in a lot of hospital settings. So our solution for usability is essentially put all of our headsets into kiosk mode and a VR headset. So all you need to do to administer is turn the power on, put the headset on a kid, and it instantly starts up. So our solution is essentially taking the size of this device and shrinking it to the size of a VR headset, and then making it as easy as possible to administer, again, opening access to this kind of intervention to radiology suite of any kind and delivered in any language around the world. But rather than recreating the wheel by transferring the experience of this physical mock MRI just into a VR space, with proper design, there's a much more potential in ways to engage patients and prepare them for their MRI. So focusing on our design techniques, these are a few that I'll be highlighting. One being just the language. So when dealing with kids, you have to make sure that they comprehend everything that they're being delivered. That it's not necessarily a game; it's a new medium to engage and display the content that you want to connect to your end user. So for these reasons, I cannot stress enough just play testing and working through the way that you deliver that content to make sure that all children understand, in this case, their MRIs and what's exactly involved in their procedure. So since I mentioned that age was a primary factor in one's ability to stay calm and stay still, we targeted age ranges about 6 to 10 years old for the ReadyTeddy intervention. These are the kids that are generally like on the line of maturity where they may or may not be able to be sedated. So again, by a little bit providing them with this training, we're hoping that we can reduce the need for unnecessary sedation. So what we did is we had our script and we run it through various apps, tools that read the narrative and then determine the reading age of that script. So we wanted to make sure that kids, even at the age of 6, could understand it as well as the more mature, older ages of 10 years old. The next thing I want to talk about is the point of view. So we make sure that the point of view, the height of the camera in the experience remains pretty constant, about 50 inches tall, or about the average age of an 8-year-old, because we wanted the simulation to be as close to real as possible, and as much of it being done through the eyes, or being developed through putting yourself in the shoes of those young patients. So by creating an experience that is user-centered but also realistic, we're providing an opportunity for preparation, for stress resilience, for kids, and just to get ready for their procedures in medical situations. But how can we engage people to be equipped with the tools to have a better medical experience? And one of which is the characters that we have them engage with. So we chose Teddy because, well, we only had a few minutes to establish rapport with a patient, and pretty much everyone's familiar with a teddy bear. But teddy bears are familiar enough for these diverse populations, and we believe that our warm and friendly character is that best vehicle to deliver this content. However, in addition to this VR experience, we also think it's really important to continue the narrative outside and into the physical world. So for each headset that we provide to clinicians, and we also provide an MRI compatible plush stuffed animal of Teddy, so that kids can take that bear with them into the scanner. And so as we look forward to the future of ReadyTeddy, we're going to be building some free web resources, so to expand that narrative from a Teddy that they can engage with at home, that they can engage with in a clinical setting, in a VR space, and then a physical bear that they can take into the MRI space as well. The metaphors are part of the kind of the narrative and storytelling, taking advantage of this virtual world. We use several of my favorite metaphors that really connect with children and help them to absorb that information. For example, at one point, the scanner turns into a donut, and particle systems, confetti rain from the ceiling, make it a little more approachable. Teddy also goes into the scanner and illustrates the importance of staying still by having Polaroid images pop up and show the difference between, this is what the quality of a scan looks like when you're staying still versus when I'm wiggling around. This is what the scan looks like. How the quality of the image is affected by someone's motion. But really focusing on quality storytelling here. And then lastly, interaction. If you've ever had a kid put a VR headset on, you'll see how incredibly excited they get. And since one of our goals is to kind of calm children down and train them to remain still, you can imagine the difficulty of stillness training when someone is in such an excitable state. So for that reason, the narrative runs a little slow rate, and the UI elements are somewhat nominal. Some kids actually, say that the experience itself is a little boring, but we want to balance this engagement with calmness, and it can be a tricky line to walk. But I see a lot of products in hospital settings kind of run multiple experiences. And if you're asking kids to make selections or initiate programs, or have like paired iPads that can drop when a network goes down, or make selections on paired devices, you're really asking for eventual complications and more obstacles to implementation. So making interaction as simple as possible is crucial for driving adoption and making an impact, particularly with these time-strapped teams. So speaking of interaction, one of our main game mechanics is actually raycasting, and that's one of the things we use for motion training. So at one point during ReadyTeddy, the perspective changes of laying down on the MRI bed and entering the MRI bed. And this is when one of our first motion training mini games is played. So if you see here, this crosshair in the middle of the screen is fixed to the position of the patient's head and moves in conjunction with that patient. So as they move outside the threshold of a good scan, these audio visual cues are prompting them to remain still. And this game was created because when I would talk to kids and tell them, you have to stay as still as a statue for their MRI, they would often say, well, can I breathe? and say, yes, yes, please do breathe during your scan. But it came to show that telling a kid to stay still meant very different things between people. So by providing them with this feedback with audio visual cues, we're very clearly defining what it means to stay still, but also giving them the tools to provide a quality MRI that within that 3 millimeter threshold of a quality MRI for most scans. So after playtesting this first game, we heard many people saying that the target actually compelled kids to move. So our second mini game replaced that crosshair with a transparent image of Teddy. So in order to get the images clear, the patient must overlap the two images, again, thus training them to stay still within the threshold of a good scan. And again, there are these audio visual cues when motion takes place. So between these two games, it became very clear to kids what it means to stay still. And one important thing that I want to note, and how I think we're taking best advantage of the VR form factor, is that we're collecting motion during these games and really using a VR headset as a body computing device. So the primary concern of an MRI is keeping your head perfectly still. And since a VR headset measures head motion in order to render images, we're looking at two ways of essentially measuring analogous motion metrics. So one of our patent pending technologies is applying the same mathematics of MRI quality control in real time to head motion during the simulation. And our goal is essentially to make an aptitude test on an individual's ability to stay still in a simulated MRI. So we're hoping with enough age norm data, we can successfully predict someone's ability to complete an MRI by examining their ability to stay still in this simulated environment. And you can see here, we're collecting that head motion along 3 degrees of freedom. So that's kind of some of our baseline value, but also where we think we're going to go in the future, particularly as we make the claims of a medical device, although we're not there yet. But here are some of our existing partners, and we do have clinicians and researchers at CHLA, at Keck School of Medicine, at University of Florida. We just became an affiliate of UConn that are looking for companies that are using machine learning in new and innovative ways. That mock scanner kind of paved the way for this cultural change. And so we're hoping that with an easier to use product that's more scalable, that doesn't take the space, we can really make an impact on medicine and the ways that VR are being adopted in the healthcare industry. So I want to thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to share some of our design principles. But again, I still think we think of VR as a premium product, and I really want to compel some of these amazing members of our community that immersive technologies and their new use cases can really be an opportunity to bridge this disparity in healthcare. And I'm very, very excited for the future of this technology in this industry. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me for any collaborations or any questions that you may have. So yeah, that's it. But yeah, thanks very much for your time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us, Max, and all about ReadyTeddy and pediatric MRI preparation. And next, we will have Jack Chen, the CEO and founder of Cognitive Leap.
Let me check. Okay, all right. Hi, Julie.
Hi, great to have you with us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speaking to the audience here. I very much appreciate it. And also I understand this is a holiday, so it's great that dedicated people are still working during that day. Yeah, I don't have any slides, but I think I can more of a conversation. Any questions, feel free to ask at any time. So I started Cognitive Leap 5.5 years ago. with the idea of using technology to scale the solution for mental health worldwide. And so I was in the finance industry in my prior life. The reason I got into this is some shocking facts about mental health. And one is a stigma. The other is that in less developed countries, actually the accessibility is a gigantic issue. So taking China as an example, some of the data that I saw is that there are 190 million people that has mental health problems. I'm talking about they meet the standard of mental health diagnosis as having problems. And when I look at kids with attention challenges like ADHD, and so there's 23 million population there. Neurodevelopmental psychologists there. So as you can see, there's such a gigantic gap between supply and demand. So having come out of China about 30 some years ago, studying here and doing business across the two countries, I see that there's much we can do worldwide, starting from China, and also expand to some other country, because there's a gigantic need there. So our first product, using virtual reality to help medical professionals with assessment of kids sustain, the ability to sustain attention. So Skip's work in the past couple of dozens of years give us a lot of guidance on what to develop. It is worth tens of thousands of dollars for a set of equipment, and it's not very high quality, versus nowadays it's quite different. So it took us a few years to develop the product, and we've tested in different institutions, including Stanford and Duke and so forth. We actually had a lot of good feedback, and we already started our FDA process. By the end of this year, we should submit 510K application. So hopefully, we hope we'll get the approval sometime next year. So in China, because there's such a a gap between supply and demand. So even before our FDA approval, this is how wonderful it is to kind of synergize between the two places. We're able to license our solution to more than 24 of leading hospitals and rehab centers in China without technology. So the hospital figure that we don't really have a lot of qualified people, the doctors, but at least when people come in, you guys don't put any label on anybody, because the report only shows the kids' ability to sustain attention as compared to the normative sets of data, same age, same gender, and how they rank in terms of percentile. Are they on the top 20, 30, 40%, or are they in the bottom 10%? So that gives us some kind of objective data to whoever is trying to diagnose the kid using paper and pencil subjective tools. So far, we have, initially it took us a bit of a persuasion to get hospitals to adapt to it, but now we have hospitals and rehab centers all coming over to us asking for that. And so by the end of this year, we think at minimum, with only a couple of salesperson actually, we think we can probably reach about over 100 hospitals and clinic adapting the technology. So we're very, very excited about this. And actually we already expand into Spain, mainly because we have somebody reaching out to us saying that they're very, very interested. And in the US, we have not started the process yet, mainly because of the entry costs is high, and there are lots of doctors who can prescribe, and it's kind of like a way here moving other people's cheese. You don't want to do that. But we'll eventually plan to do something in the States. So in terms of intervention, we have developed a non-drug intervention approach for ADHD, which we currently have tested in China and also have received tremendous feedback. So very, very excited. And Skip said that he has some slides. So Skip, feel free to show the slides. Okay, yeah.
Hi, Jack, why don't you finish describing where, the evolution of the company, and at the end, I can talk for 4 or 5 minutes about how the classroom evolved from an academic research study and show some images of where it was then and where you've brought it now, and talk a little bit about some of the features of it. So you're on mute. You're on mute, Jack.
Okay. I see. Sorry for this. Skip, thank you so much for jumping to kind of make a very good suggestion. So let me just quickly, in a couple of minutes, describe to you what it is. Okay, so that's based on the study and research of Skip Rizzo, professor, wonderful man. And our current product is that we put kids in a virtual classroom in a 13 minutes with a CPT test, which is AX test that we use, so we measure people's ability to sustain attention in 6 different dimensions. And the report will show in each dimension how the kid performed as compared to a set of normative data. This tool, it is very, very easy to apply because the whole process is about 13 minutes. And our test, in Duke hospital system, was actually, feedback was really good by parents and also by the doctor that try this product. People like it. People like the fact that, they are in the virtual classroom instead of a standard paper and pencil. Of course, this is not meant to replace paper and pencil approach, which is critical, but it's a wonderful tool to destigmatize the process without putting a label, but in a short time, letting people know the kids' ability to sustain attention. So which will give the power to the parents to decide what to do next. And we found out in China, this has been a tremendously good screening tool, and we currently are already implement that in some of the leading grade schools in China. We're expanding as well. So maybe Skip, you can show the prior and now. And of course, the video is only the tiny part of that. What's really differentiating, of course, the past and current now is that there's AI elements into it. Of course, it's all based on some of the latest hardware and software technologies.
Okay, let me share my screen real quick. Oh, I'm gonna make sure you get the sound. I always am impulsive since I have ADD. There we go. Okay, so just real quick, what Jack and Cognitive Leap have done is essentially to move assessment into the future using VR, neuropsychological assessment. And it really spawned from an idea back at what was called the Integrated Media Systems Center back in 1998, where the idea was simply put a child in a virtual reality classroom and have them do a test while we can systematically present distractions in this immersive environment. This is what it looked like in 1998. In 2000, this is what it looked like. We got a little bit of an upgrade. There was no funding really for VR at the time, so this was all done on the backs of graduate students. And you can see the the level of computer graphics and so on. But this is what a child would see looking around in the classroom. They have to respond when they see a letter sequence, an A followed by an X. And meanwhile, people would walk in the room, a paper airplane would float around the room, cars would go by the window, and so on. And we developed a number of different tests, some more, using visual images and listening tasks and so on. We played around with this concept for a while. It got another upgrade, and this is what it looked like then. And this was a test publisher actually had an interest in this, the Psychological Corporation. And, we built it out, from the research prototype, and added a lot more different types of distractions, like the teacher moving to answer the door, a bus going by the window. I think you might have seen the paper airplane float by thrown by a kid in the back row. And over the years, it turned out that 2003 was too early for us to think about productizing this. We did a lot of focus groups with clinicians at the International Neuropsychological Society meeting, the National Academy of Neuropsychologists meeting, and everybody loved it. We had really good data to support the value of this. But then when you get to the last question, and this was again 2003, 2004, the last question was, would you be willing to spend $8,000 to $10,000 on a specialized computer, a VR headset, and the software? And everybody kind of got cold feet at that point. It was a little bit early for its time. So it turned into a research tool, and we distributed it freely and published a lot of different papers with kids with ADHD, but also manipulating elements in the classroom and with other clinical populations. And I just want to show, from one of the studies, one of the early studies, just showing on some of the core metrics, how many times did a child miss a target? How many times did they hit when there was no target, more of an impulsive responding, the reaction time variability. These are kind of the core metrics that are used with regular computerized flat screen delivered cognitive assessment. And, we were able to document across a series of studies the, real significant differences between ADHD kids and controls. And a couple of the studies looked at kids with ADHD on and off medication and compared to a control group, and found that in this, very well-studied population that we had access to, that the performance on medication, was more like a neurotypical child. One of the big assets with using VR to do this was the idea of being able to use head tracking. Like Max had talked about, this is an important feature of virtual reality. The fact that, as you move your head, the graphics have to update in real time to create the illusion of presence or being in a virtual environment, but it also serves as a measurement device. So what I'm going to show here is a very quick demo of the importance of that, and the idea that you can represent data captured in a virtual environment, say to a parent or a teacher, in a way that is intuitive for them to grasp. So what you're seeing on this slide, if you look at that red line, that is a randomly selected child from one of the data sets from one of the study, a randomly selected ADHD kid. And we map out their head movement. We also tracked hand and leg movement, in the research. But clinically, with the headset, you're getting this kind of data. You can see that over the course, in this case, a 10-minute task, that the head movement becomes more extreme and over time and so forth. And if you look closely, you'll see a green line embedded in there, and that was a randomly selected neurotypical. And, you can see quite a bit less head movement in the presence of distractions in the environment. And we studied this quite a bit, but we also developed a way to render this type of data that would be really intuitive. And this is, again, one of the strengths of virtual reality, capacity to represent data in a way that people get beyond a graph, like this, even though it's a pretty decent graph, I would say. And so what we did was we took this exact data set here and we rendered it onto these little virtual avatar heads. So this is that same data with these children looking at the blackboard 24 seconds in. Now it jumps to 53 And you see, as distractions come, the ADHD kid is doing reasonably well. He's he's able to follow but and the neurotypical may look away at a distractor, but gets back on task. And now we see at 5 minutes, the ADHD child continues to be distracted by, at the time, a very limited repertoire of distracting technology or distracting stimuli. You see he's still looking around. Now we have what we call in the lab the exorcist clip. And this is the actual head movement of that child while they're doing the task. Now they're going to see the paper airplane floating by, and he's going to follow it and look around. And now he's going to look up at the ceiling. And this is what you see over the course of the test. You see the progression of distractibility, derailment, if you will. And in addition to creating, kind of a cool little demo video to help people to see that, we also get all the data out of that. So we can tell if a child is looking at the blackboard or the whiteboard and missing targets, loss of focus perhaps, as opposed to looking out the window or looking to the side and having the stimuli outside of their field of view, which would be more of a distractibility error. That's something you can't get from any real traditional method of neuropsych assessment with this, looking at attention in this way. So we get that data. And so anyway, when I met up with Jack, this is what ended up getting created. This is an older version, I think, Jack. I think this is 2018. But, we built out the classroom similar to how it had been created before with a wider range of distractions. And now we're building a variety of other types of tasks in the environment. And the good news, I'll stop there. Good news is thus far, we've got a normative data set of about 700 kids, the neurotypical children, and kids from 6 to 13. So we've got a really nice data set to build norms to make comparisons. And we're collecting at 4 sites data from children with ADHD off their medications, so that we'll have a comparison sample. And the one other thing that I think is really neat, more for researchers, is that we've built a version of the classroom that now allows researchers that use the software package called ePrime, where you can create your own testing and training materials. That content, your ePrime tests, can be piped into the classroom while you can still systematically manipulate distraction and so on. So you can build your own tasks in a way that allows you, if it's relevant, to ask other kinds of assessment type questions, whether it's a Stroop that you've developed or an NBAC task or whatever it is that you've built on this ePrime test development software, you can pump into this thing. And we look at that as a pretty useful tool for researchers that want to study cognitive processes in children beyond just what you would do in an ADHD protocol. So with that, I'm going to jump out of my screen share. We've got a few minutes for questions and conversation.
Thank you, Skip.
I got a question for you, Max.
Sure, Skip. What do you got?
I love hearing all the good news, but a lot of times I want to hear the challenges that you had to overcome. Did you have much pushback from traditional clinicians on the use of VR for this? And did you get much pushback because, of some folks believing that children shouldn't use VR, that near eye displays might cause visual problems and so on? So I'm sure you did. I'm just curious how you overcame it, or how difficult it was.
Yeah, I mean, the interpupillary distance is a problem that I don't see. It's a hardware problem, and so since Facebook has acknowledged that they're not targeting anyone under 13, and I don't think that's specific to VR per se, because kids under 13 can't get a Facebook account anyway. But I think that they will start targeting children eventually. So I think it's just a matter of one of these big players slowly changing their hardware. But yeah, this last year was tough because, you know, COVID, hospitals have a lot on their table for good reason, you know, and so having any new sort of device that is particularly touching somebody in this environment that we're in, adoption rates have been pretty slow, and again for good reason. But I think as the world starts to get back to normal, I'm hoping that we can see it come back, and people will be more open to these sorts of interventions. But for the most part, I think it's pretty positive. I think it's pretty positive. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I think it's a risk benefit analysis on these things. So, you know, your experience isn't for hours; it's a short experience, and there really isn't data to support the claim that, you know, short use of VR is going to have a differential effect with children. And most of the clinical VR applications are in fact short doses. It's not like people are wearing a headset all day. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, speaking of that, I think one thing that really concerns me is the like non-human characters and how amazing AI is becoming. And I think in pediatrics, this is a huge concern, because if anyone has ever tried the Wolves in the Walls, is amazing VR narrative, but the AI-driven character is incredibly compelling, and your experience changes very much with how you interact with this character. So thinking about, you know, children's prefrontal cortex hasn't been fully developed. Their abilities to differentiate between abstraction and reality are different. So if you have an AI character, I think that is a huge concern that I think all of us, particularly as business leaders or as academics, I think that's something that we have to be very conscious of.
yep, certainly.
Skip, it looks like there's a question for you in the chat.
Yeah, and there's one in here about can we connect Zoom classroom experiences? And I believe it is possible through the software that we created in partnership with the company that produced ePrime. I think you could probably take any type content. I know that there's a study going on up at Northeastern looking at children in memory, where they have specific video clips that they show before the kid has done exercise, or looking at the impact of exercise on cognitive function and memory. And I believe they're using stuff that was created outside of ePrime, but imported into ePrime and then piped into our classroom. And a second question, issues with testing children 6, 7, and 8. You know, maybe I'm biased, and maybe Jack can weigh in on this, but like you said, Max, kids, you know, they love this stuff. And we didn't, you know, whether, you know, we studied, actually at Children's Hospital, we studied kids getting VR to overcome the fear of getting an IV insertion or a needle stick. So they did VR in real time. And one of the interesting things we found was we looked at side effects as part of that. We had kids fill out a simulator sickness questionnaire adapted for children, where we tried to explain what some of these symptoms were, because kids don't really fully get all the you know, these symptoms in their self-reporting. We tested them before and after, and we found actually a reduction at the end of, you know, a 7 to 10 minute thing. And what that really meant was a lot of the symptoms that are considered to be cyber sickness symptoms may also be symptoms of anxiety, that they were more anxious before they came in, and after they played in the VR environment, they reported less. But you know, I think integrate. I mean, look, there's a lot of work to be done, but there has been quite a large number of kids in this age group that have been tested with this device and with other head mount display devices and other studies that I know of. And we just don't see the critical incidents that some folks might expect. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be vigilant to this. Keep an eye just out of professional ethics, you know, and we certainly do that. We try to monitor all of these things. Some other questions. One for you, Max. There.
Sure. It looks like the question is, when in the process does a parent get asked if they want to bypass sedation? So it's usually when a MRI is ordered. A child life specialist or MRI tech or nurse will essentially gauge the likelihood of a child's ability to stay still during the MRI and get quality images the first time. So that's when they will call families and say, does your kid get anxious in medical settings? Have they had any trouble with an MRI before? But you'd be really surprised how little data informs that decision. So that would be the point at which the parent is asked if they want sedated. Sometimes the families are still in the hospital setting. Sometimes they just do that via a phone call. So the goal is to have ReadyTeddy be administered at that point and then reinforced right prior to the scan to, again, just make sure that they know exactly what they're getting into before they enter the scanning room.
You know, go ahead.
Skip.
I was just going to ask a question to you and to Jack about what you see on the horizon. Max, I mean, it looks like you have a very nice brand. You have a character that you're testing, and it seems to be engaging. And what do you think about other uses? Do you ever think about lateral development with that character for other purposes?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge problem in dentistry, in pediatric dentistry. You know, kids are often sedated for that for a good reason, depending on all of our experiences with our dentists. But I think the vaccination use case is fantastic.
Especially with children with special needs, that, you know, kids on the spectrum, sometimes it's sheer hell bringing them in for regular blood draws and so forth. Absolutely.
And so this one application, VR vaccine, had a narrative that matched just as closely to the procedure. So I think it was like, there was a warrior, and the warrior gave an alcohol swab magic touch on the arm, and then a dragon, you know, like gave them a little kiss on the arm, which was the site of an injection. And it just, the potential for storytelling and the potential for engagement rather than distraction is huge for pediatrics. So I think there's a lot of use cases and a lot of room to grow for the technology.
Jack, what about you? What are you seeing ahead for Cognitive Leap?
I think VR is a very good tool based on what we have seen, and we're getting very familiarized with this hardware and, you know, the technology and so forth. I think we were looking to using that as part of the intervention tool as well, when the product become lighter and cheaper. So I think there is a very good future for this particular hardware. I believe in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some other questions here, like for ReadyTeddy. What was the comparison feedback from kids who used the application and had an MRI? So that's another amazing strengths of this, is that there's a lot of neuroimaging studies with open data sets. So we can measure how someone that hasn't had any sort of intervention, how they perform in an MRI, someone who had that traditional mock MRI, and then who used ReadyTeddy in the VR performance. And we're seeing very similar performance measures with that traditional mock MRI training. So just by having the same effect, but making essentially easier to administer and smaller footprint, that's kind of the trajectory of how we're getting into different hospitals. And then the question for who pays for it, this is kind of the giant question that Skip alluded to with these neuropsych companies. we're still working through this. Like if you're going to get a medical device, there's not huge predicate for a lot of these products. So they're going through a de novo pathway, and these things just take a lot of time and money. And it's something that we're working through, and at the moment providers are paying for it, but you can see if it's reducing unnecessary procedures. You see companies like Kaiser who have that unique payer provider relationship, or health systems abroad. You can see that there's a natural use case of just a more efficient clinical treatment for kids. Yes, providers
Okay.
meaning the hospital.
All right. Well, it looks like we're getting down to the wire, and I'm sure everybody wants to get back to their backyard barbecue on Memorial Day. So unless there's any more questions, Julie, this will be available for others to watch on the SMART-VR website, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct. And I also put the link to the YouTube website as well as to our main website, so y'all can stay updated.
All right.
Great. Thanks very much for the opportunity, Julie. It's great to see you, Jack and Skip. And best of luck to everyone. Have a great day.
All right.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you for
Judy. And
coming.
it's a pleasure meeting you, Max.
Mhm.
Likewise,
Bye-bye.
Jack.
Thank you all
Likewise.
for coming.
See you.
Take care.